Boom! What's up, fam? Anthony Johnson here today, founder of 21 Studios, 21 Convention, 22 Convention, 21 University, and co-founder of the Redman Group. Here with episode 143 of the Redman Group with returning special guest, Janice Fiamengo, the beautiful, the amazing, and extremely savage. I call her the anti-feminist champion, anti-feminist queen of the world, because she's so savage. And she's also the only woman I've ever allowed on the Redman Group. I'm actually sharing my man card with her to bring her on the show today. It's very dangerous, actually, for me to do that, but I'm happy to do it. Because her defense of men and advocacy for men and antagonism and combating of feminism is really amazing and profound and savage and sincere. I have great respect for her. And without further ado, welcome Janice Fiamengo, Professor Janice Fiamengo, back to the Redman Group. Janice, welcome back.
Anthony, I think we should end the interview right there because there's no way that I can't disappoint after that introduction. I've never had such a great introduction.
I have full confidence in you. I'm very happy to have you back, Janice. It's a pleasure.
Yep. Well, thank you for having me on, and thank you for that very, very kind and generous introduction.
You're welcome. So welcome back to the show. It's been about a year since you went on. We were just talking behind the scenes. You were on here right before COVID hit last year.
Yeah.
And we had our 15 minutes of fame. Make Women Great Again went viral. I have Make Women Wives Again on today. I'm on a new roll, these hats. I have like 30 of them now. I just keep making up new ones. I can't stop. It's my male privilege. It gets me the creativity, obviously.
Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That testosterone.
Yep. But before we get further into the show, you were on her last year, but the channel has grown a lot since then, probably like 80,000 followers or something. So for the fans who don't know you and didn't see you last year, what's your background? Who are you? And who is Janice Fiamengo for them to know more about you?
Yeah, I taught English at the University of Saskatchewan and the University of Ottawa for 20 years. And I retired in 2019 because I wanted to get out of the culture of woke. And it was really, when I was a graduate student studying English literature, which involves always a very heavy dose of intersectional feminist theory, as well as Marxist, post-colonial, and eco-critical theories, all of which attack the West as the source of all evil in the world, and of course attack patriarchy and portray women and people of color and various so-called others as innocent victims of white supremacist oppressive power. So I was pretty much indoctrinated into that worldview by the time I was in my late 20s, finishing up my PhD. I found it a kind of exhilarating theory, even though it didn't correspond to anything in my life. I had never been a victim of anything, and I had encountered nothing but encouragement and, wise and compassionate mentorship from the various men that I worked with and worked under, the theory of victimhood, of innocent victimhood, is, I think, a very dangerous one because it fills the believer with an ecstatic conviction of righteousness. And also, of course, it's a very powerful position in that it enables one to make pronouncements that other people cannot contradict without being called out as enablers of systemic oppression. So anyway, I found it quite attractive, and I'm sorry, I'm actually embarrassed to admit that now, that in my late 20s, as a full adult, doing higher education, I bought into such a crude and reductive theory of
to interject a little
society.
Bit. If I'm understanding you correctly, so victim culture was already taking really strong in the 1990s up in Canada?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we are wrong to assume that this is a recent thing. I was just recently rereading a book that was published in 1998. It's by a guy named Martin Loney, and it's called The Creation. Now I'm going to forget I've got it sitting on my desk, The Pursuit of Division, and the subtitle is Racial and Gender Preference. And it is about how racial and gender preference were instituted in hiring, in promotion, in scholarships and university admission, all sorts of things all across the board, starting in the 1970s and 1980s. So that by the early 1990s, the system of preference and the entire grievance industry that goes along with it was already fully in place. So this has been happening. There have been people paid to push this narrative for at least 30 to 40 years in North American society. And so I encountered that. And I thought, well, it must be at least partially true, because nobody contradicted it amongst the very intelligent and seemingly reasonable people that I encountered at university. So I started my first full-time tenure track job in 1999 at the University of Saskatchewan, basically believing it. I think I was already beginning to find it a bit too radical, a bit too hateful, because the hatred against men, especially against white men, but the allegation that all women are innocent victims of male sexual predation and brutality, that's very strong in the theory, and even I could see that simply wasn't true. But as soon as I started teaching it, the whole thing, like a house of cards, collapsed, because I could just see that the women in my classes were not innocent victims. They were confident, they were aggressive, they were doing better than the men. They outnumbered the men by a significant margin at universities all across the country.
It sounds like around this time you started realizing these claims are really extreme and lacked extreme evidence, or even like any evidence.
Any evidence at all. And that was really the first. I mean, I think already I was starting to doubt it, but as soon as I encountered the young men in my classrooms, I just all of a sudden I just had this quite searing moment of illumination when I thought what it must be like even if it was true about the past, which I was already starting to doubt, but let's say it was true about the past, that up until, the 1960s, women had been very badly treated and had been shut out of all sorts of opportunities. Why should young men of 18, 19, 20 sitting in university classrooms have to hear about the perfidy of their sex? Why should they have to pay the price? And that was the clear message, that they were going to have to pay the price. They would have to step back. They would have to let their empowered sisters come forward and take the reins of power and make the world a much better place. And I
just
realized
the alleged sins of their fathers and grandfathers.
Exactly. It was collective vengeance in the most crude and really horrifically brutal, malicious, envious form. And, so I just thought it must be horrific to be those young men who are obviously not privileged, who are a bit abashed, who are mostly sitting silent in classroom after classroom, listening to all this nonsense about the sins of their fathers and the terrible things that they had done, nothing about the good things that their forefathers had done. And I just at that point I very quickly retreated from it and became at least a skeptical feminist. In fact, I wouldn't even have called myself a feminist already by that point. But then it wasn't until quite a bit later on that I began to see the, just all of the frenzied protests, the anti-male animus that was spreading all across North American universities. I saw the protest against Warren Farrell's talk in 2012 at the University of Toronto. That was the first time I really became aware that the anti-male hatred had become part of an organized movement to actually shut down speakers. Now, I'm sure this was happening before. In fact, I've read things about the cancellation of various professors, going well back again into the 1980s and 1990s. But that was the first time I actually saw a speaker brought on campus and not allowed to give his talk. He did eventually, but he was prevented from speaking for about an hour and a half. And there was as probably many of your viewers know, there was like a band of crazed feminists chanting, shouting, swearing at people who were attempting to attend the talk.
Were you and Steve Brule personally there for this? Or that was
Steve Brule was personally there. I wasn't there. Wow. I didn't know Steve at this point. I didn't get to know Steve until the following year, and that was when our collaboration began. But he was there. It's a wonderful story, really. He just decided to go. It was taking place at the University of Toronto. He lived in Kingston, which is just outside of Toronto. And so he drove down with his camera equipment and caught it all on film, put it up on his YouTube channel, and it went viral. And so after that, he thought he might as well start documenting the craziness of the feminist movement. So and so that was really the beginning. Then I gave a talk at the University of Toronto in the following spring of 2013, and it also, it eventually went ahead, but they pulled the fire alarm, and they were acting as if, I don't know, as if I was calling for women to be strung up and or have their head shaved and beaten.
Burn those witches at the stake.
Yeah, I mean, it was really that was when they started making all these claims about how even the existence of somebody like me or anybody questioning anything about the intersectional feminist narrative, even the existence of us on campus somehow harmed people. And made them vulnerable to violence, and we hear that now over and over again. And when anyone tries to articulate anything even mildly dissenting from the orthodoxy, so that was really the beginning of it. And then after that, I became pretty passionately involved in the men's issues movement, the anti-feminist movement, and speaking out against the lies of feminist theory whenever I could.
Yeah, that's one of the things I love about you most is that you're anti-feminist. You don't try to align yourself with feminism. Like Christina Hoff Sommers, I think, calls herself a factual feminist or a rational feminist or something like that. There's a few others like that who will provide some pretty good criticism even of feminism. But then they still try to salvage this movement that I view as just completely toxic and negative at this point, and has been for a long time, if not from the very beginning, like Steve argues. Yeah,
Steve argues that it was, I mean, I would certainly agree with Steve. That it was contaminated from the beginning. This is not to say that there were never egalitarian feminists in the movement. Of course there were, but it was contaminated by resentment and by a false mythology of the malevolence of male power. And that's there clearly in the Seneca Falls statements back in 1848. If you read the suffragist literature of the late 19th century, early 20th century, it's there everywhere. Even those that we think of as the most benevolent sorts of feminists talk about men as the root of all evil. There's a woman in Canada named Nellie McClung who says outright, she has slogans like, men make wounds and women bind them up. And she campaigned for the vote for women on the idea that when women could vote, all wars would cease, because war was entirely a male enterprise, and that women as mothers and as caregivers and as the guardians of compassion and empathy would never vote for war.
That just sounds like delusional narcissism is what it sounds like.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And she was probably the most significant feminist spokesperson of the first wave movement that we now all look back to as this very reasonable and righteous movement. So I think Steve is absolutely right that it was contaminated from the beginning with that kind of envy, resentment, grievance mongering, and
by beginning, to be clear for the audience, you don't just mean the 1920s or 1910s, you mean the 1840s and 50s and stuff, right?
Oh yes, it's certainly there. When you go back to 1848, you can see it there. So I mean, it's there even earlier. If you go back to Mary Wollstonecraft in the late 18th century, and her she wrote a book called The Wrongs of Woman in, I'm forgetting the exact date, I think 1792, and I'm sure you could go back even further.
That was interesting with
the seeds of that.
You and Piers Morgan were arguing about the origins of feminism, and he kept trying to go back to feminism in Britain, which preceded even feminism in America. So that was kind of interesting debate, but most people I think would take it back to about Seneca Falls in most arguments, right?
Yeah. Well, he was talking about the late 19th century, early 20th century, I think, because he was talking mainly about the suffragists, those who campaigned for women's right to vote. They were an extremely radical sect in the United Kingdom. And I was trying to just make the point that even there were many men who couldn't vote at that time. So what?
Well, why does that matter, Janice? Why does that matter? He was scared of you, I think, very legitimately afraid of your knowledge. He realized you knew more than him about these issues.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't do a good job, but I'm never quick enough in those moments. But it's ridiculous to claim that these were the pure feminists who cared only about equality, when they never once campaigned for the right of poor men who didn't own property, men who lacked the qualifications to register as voters, and who were being sent off to die on the battlefields of Europe at the very same time that these women were proclaiming their own victimhood. The ironies of that, and the fact that many of these same women were involved in the White Feather campaign to shame any men that they saw on the streets who appeared to be able-bodied and who hadn't signed up for the First World War to fight in the war and to die. The bloodthirstiness of many of these women and their indifference to male suffering and indeed male death is quite staggering. And we still see that today, of course. Women expect to have all the privileges that they see men as having, but to bear none of the responsibilities or burdens.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to bring up, by the way, the interview again with Piers Morgan here. He obviously left. I think he just basically walked off the set not long ago.
Yeah.
But this was so much fun. And, you said you didn't do that good. I disagree. I think you did so good. Here's my opinion, my argument, that they refused to even bring you back on camera. That's how terrified they were of you. They knew they could attack me. With you, I think Piers personally realized that arguing with you was dangerous. It was going to get worse, and you're a woman, so he can't bash and come after you personally. With me, they started doing ad hominem attacks. They had these feminists that were going after me. We couldn't even see them. So, yeah, but I think they were terrified of you in a way. With me, it was combative and fun. With you, they were like, what do we do with this woman? And like, let's just silence her. They basically like soft-censored you to keep you out of the argument, which on their part was clever. So,
well, I don't know. That's a generous reading of it. I thought I always, in these moments, I feel like I'm far too ponderous. I speak too slowly. You have to really be able to get your zingers in. And so maybe they just decided, I just wasn't interesting enough. But, you were there with a lot of quick comebacks. You mentioned a lot of slogans. The future is female. I remember that you went 1, 2, 3, 4, all these examples of female chauvinism, female moral superiority. And I thought that was really clever. I was trying to make some long, complicated argument, and that doesn't really work when you've only got 20 seconds to answer.
I view it. I did prepare like that, actually. We talked on the phone obviously before this interview, and I really was like, what should be my best role? Not only to the interview, but in general, is what I do fighting feminism, combating it, trying to destroy it or abolish it, as Piers described it, which I love. But I view it as I don't need to be the next Jordan Peterson or even the next Janice Fiamengo. Not that it could be a woman, but you know what I mean. I don't need to be the next Steve Burley. You guys are covering this in ways that are much more extensive and in depth and researched. And God bless, we need that. But we also need someone like me to be kind of like a mini Trump that just bashes these people over the head with things that are combative and polarizing and even a little bit insulting to the extent they deserve it, and really challenges them,
I agree. I think we all have to work to our strengths. And I also think I find that having a wing of the anti-feminist movement that is really aggressive and unapologetic is useful in all sorts of ways, because it does push our opponents who articulate the mainstream orthodoxy, pushes them back on their heels. It also, some people think, it damages our movement, because we say, rude things, and we should never do that. We should never speak against feminism, and we should always make sure we say it's for equality. But I think it's really useful because you also allow other people to move into positions that would have been unacceptable, except that you're pushing even further past those. So you're making it acceptable for people to articulate positions that appear quite moderate in comparison to your more aggressive stance that they wouldn't have been able to say otherwise. So I think it's really, really important that some of us come forward aggressively.
I completely agree. That's exactly strategically I think about it too, and I analyze Trump the same way. He pushed the Overton window massively in politics and stuff. Even with feminism, Piers Morgan in 2018 was interviewing Trump. He was grilling him on feminism. He's like, "Why aren't you a feminist?" And Trump's like, "No, I'm not a feminist. I'm not a feminist." He was adamant that he refused to identify as being a feminist, and Piers was, as you can imagine, just kind of annoyed by this. But in my opinion, Trump is basically the first modern, at least in the past 50 years, not a feminist president, which is probably as close as you can get to being anti-feminist in that position, which pushed now the window for other people to, when we go on TV, we can talk about these things. And I can be the bad guy, and I could be the bad cop. You could be the good cop. So I love it.
Or we can both be bad cop to different degrees, and then other people can step in and be good cop, but actually articulate quite radical positions. So I think that's absolutely true.
Well, the truth is a radical thing, right? More in clown world today.
Sure. Yeah, and that is the thing too, that just to get back to what we were talking about before about the roots of feminism being corrupt. If all you have to do is read any of if you don't even want to go back to the first wavers of the 19th century or early 20th century, read some of the groundbreaking texts by the so-called foremothers of the second wave movement, which again, a lot of people say, oh, it was good. It had good origins. It went off the rails then, but they were interested in sexual liberation and equality. Well, of course, there are lots of problems with sexual liberation and equality, but if you read any of those foremothers, Kate Millett, Susan Brown Miller, Andrea Dworkin, of course, but she's a little bit later. Even like Betty Friedan, one of the earliest. You read any of them, they are radical to the core. They articulate absolute hatred and disgust. There's the Scum Manifesto by Valerie Solanas, which was published in 1967, so very early days, and is still celebrated as a core liberatory text of this time. She advocates the extermination of the male sex. I mean, she was crazed when she wrote it. She ended up having a mental breakdown and, of course, attempting to murder Andy Warhol and a number of other people. But she's celebrated as somebody with some kind of amazingly prescient vision, and that was what was embraced. Nobody disavowed her. Nobody said, "Whoa, wait a minute, this isn't somebody we want to align ourselves with," and they were allowed to get away with it. And it drives me crazy when well-intentioned men and women come on and say, well, in the early days of the feminist movement in the 1960s and 70s, it had a lot of legitimacy, but it's just gone too far lately. That isn't true, and we should stop saying it.
I agree 1,000%. And here's a question I'd like to put out to you, and I'll give you my own kind of theory on it first. I've been trying to figure out how feminism got more radical over time, even with what you just said in mind. That's always had these radical, toxic, very negative elements in it that are even if there's other things co-occurring, there's like very serious toxic roots, even from the 1840s and stuff like Steve talks about. But undeniably, I think feminism has gotten even more crazy and more radical every decade and every kind of alleged wave that goes by. So I'm like, how did that happen? And I think it's kind of like you're saying, is that no one spoke up and put an end to this crap. Not in the beginning, not 20 years in, not 50, not 100. It just keeps getting crazier and crazier, like a snowball of this, anti-male, anti-fatherhood insanity.
So if you have there's lots of different possible explanations, I think, for it. I mean, one, you could say that if feminism is a kind of mental disorder, or at least if it appeals, if it appeals to people who are already kind of liable to that kind of narcissism or that indulgence in grievance, that's a really good point. I think it does appeal, and it also exacerbates any pre-existing tendency to see oneself as a victim, and therefore to, completely misconceive the world, to feel resentment against others, to feel a lack of empathy for others, to blame others for everything that's dissatisfying in one's own life. I really do believe that it both appeals to a pre-existing condition, which I think women in general are vulnerable to, and then it exacerbates it as soon as it takes hold as the governing ideology of the person's life. So obviously it's never going to go away. Like, once you have that condition, once you embrace that as your worldview and the source of your identity, and indeed the source of your righteous, indignation, it's never going to lessen, and you're never going to be satisfied, even if you're given everything you demand. In fact, you'll just need to demand more. And so you'll
like
have to find
like a little monster that keeps eating cookies or something.
It is really, it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have a friend who feels that much of what we see in the modern feminist movement is a kind of disguised cry for help that the women themselves don't even recognize. But, you know, what do you make of the tendency of radical feminists, for example, to get together en masse and to stand on bridges or to stand in public squares protesting something, and the form of their protest is to strip off their clothes? Sometimes they write slogans on their body saying things like, "Don't touch me. I am not a sexual object. How dare you rape me?" You know, things like that. Those aren't the exact slogans, but you know what I mean? We've all seen those right on their breasts or on their stomachs, and they're standing there naked. So they're protesting being fetishized, being objectified, being
well, hang on here too,
assaulted while they're exposing themselves in this way, and therefore in a way inviting their own violation, it seems. And so he feels that this really is how can you see these people as sane or normal? How could you possibly think that there's even a kernel of justified grievance in the bizarre display of rage and self-victimhood there? The other thing I would say about it is that, you know, just on a more practical level, there are, I don't know how many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of mostly women, but some men too, who are working in positions in journalism, in social services, in the universities, in HR, in diversity offices, in government, in large corporations, just everywhere, in PR, who their entire six-figure salary depends on their continuing to push narratives of grievance, continuing to pretend that there's a big problem in our society that needs to be solved. And if they ever admitted that feminism not only achieved its aims, you know, back by like 1975, but went far past and became the worst problem that we have in our society today, they couldn't admit that because they'd lose their positions. So on that level too, they have. Well,
you just made a big point. I'd like to hit on that. So you just said, and let's dig into it, that feminism is probably the biggest problem we have today. I believe that firmly, that it's the most dangerous and lethal. It will kill America and the West, I think, if it's not stopped and abolished. Mm-hmm. Because in my view, I want to hear your take, but my view is that feminism is essentially the root dysfunction and the root attack on the relationship between men and women. And if you destroy that, if you destroy femininity and you destroy masculinity, you destroy the family, and the nations will die, period. Mm-hmm. No matter whether it's 2021 or, you know, 1,000 years ago or something. Like, this is extremely dangerous. And I don't see how any nation, America or Canada or any other, can survive with that kind of toxicity driving so deep at the relationship. Because people talk about the fall of the nuclear family, conservative and stuff in America, and that's fine. But it's like, what's really causing that? And I view it as feminism, not, and whatever its connections to communism, that's a little bit more complicated and stuff. But feminism, I hate it. Yeah.
It's inextricable from communism. You know, if you go back and read Engels, for example, he explicitly articulates a feminist critique of the family as an institution that props up capitalism and consolidates, you know, bourgeois society, and that is all about, supposedly, the oppression of women and the commodification of women. So, the feminism is communism, and vice versa. Really, the two are quite inextricable in that sense. Anyway, I know there are communists who are anti-feminist, but that's another issue. So yeah, you cannot find a strand of feminism that is not profoundly anti-family.
Yep.
They all advocate in some way essentially the destruction of the family. They may not put it in those terms. Kate Millett certainly did in 1970, the Bible of the women's liberation movement, sexual politics. But many of them will say, oh, the family needs to be, you know, reorganized. The father should not be the head of the family. They have different ideas about what family would look like, but they are essentially all advocating the destruction of the family. And it's well known that society cannot cannot stand that. And they all advocate, of course, a ever bigger, ever more controlling role for the state. The state raises the children. The state makes every decision about what parents are allowed to do, what level of involvement the father is even allowed to have in his family. The father has essentially been completely cut off from his children, according to the state. Every father has to know that under the system of law that feminists have created since the 1970s, if the mother of his children wishes, he can be entirely cut off from the lives of his children. I mean, that, I don't know, you can't, what more is there to be said about that?
Well, I could go on a rant making fun of it and bashing it, but yeah, it's extremely irrational and unjust.
The evil of it is beyond reckoning, really. It not only, of course, destroys the men that find themselves in that position when they can't even see their children because of some false allegation made by the mother of their children. But it destroys the children themselves, and the literature that exists on this, and I'm not an expert on it, but I've certainly read a lot of it now. It's it's inarguable. The consequences for the children are everything wrong in society has some root in fatherlessness. Whether it is delinquency, a mental illness, dropping out of school, criminality. If you talk to the majority of those who are incarcerated in federal prisons, it turns out that they didn't have fathers. This is well known, and yet we don't challenge it. A few people do, but it continues, and in fact, it increases. The feminist assault on the law to give women more power to entirely disenfranchise men and to push men out of families. It's just an ongoing assault. And so, I don't think you can make the argument that any other problem that we currently face is as serious.
I completely agree, and you've articulated that extremely well. Yeah, it's at the root. It's the root danger that the West and America faces, and it's very sad. And it's the danger of it. The danger of it is so disproportionate to how it's treated. Like you're saying, that it continues. There's a local representative, the elected official in Florida where I live. What's her name? She's like a AOC, like Escobari, whatever her name is. Anyway, she talks about smashing the patriarchy. She's like 29 years old, and she openly tweets about it. Talks about it when she campaigns for her little state representative position in Florida. And it's just so delusional to me, like that she does this openly. She gets very few challenges for it. It's like the patriarchy was smashed, like decades ago in America. Like you're delusional, and they see nothing but patriarchy and oppression around them. They're fucking crazy. Pardon my French.
It is, and the lack of pushback, the extent to which I really don't understand it. Yeah, the extent to which men don't come forward. I mean, I understand it in that it is very difficult for an individual man, especially a man who has hostages to fortune in the form of his own children and family that he wants to support. We're at the point where a man can lose his job merely for making statements against feminism. So it's incredibly perilous. And it is startling to see the degree of the anger, the fanatical hatred that is allowed to be articulated and even applauded. I mean, last year there was a woman named Mona El Tahawi. Remember her? She's an Egyptian American who traveled all around the world, I think in the fall of 2019, promoting a book called something like The 7 Necessary Sins for Women and Girls. And she's essentially encouraging women and girls to own anger and own lust and own, the rage against the patriarchy. I forget what all the various sins were that she was promoting. And she actually advocated violence against men. She claimed it was just a fantasy or it was just a metaphor, that she wasn't serious. but she was essentially talking about vigilante violence. She asked, how many men would we have to kill? How many men would we have to kill before patriarchy came to the table and negotiated for, equality or some such thing? The very fact that she can say that, make money for it, be applauded for it, even have men write to her. I used to look at her Twitter page and she'd have men saying, I love you, go girl, I'm with you 100%, while she's advocating violence against men and pretending to be oppressed. If she were really oppressed, she would have said that once, and she would have been jailed, beaten, or perhaps even murdered. Of course, instead, she is celebrated for it and is making a very comfortable, I'm sure, 6-figure salary as a much sought after speaker and author. So some oppression, it looks pretty good, a good gig if you can get it. And, that's common. Like, she's not an outlier in any way. There are women like that all over the place, either at working as feminist activists, publishing their books, flogging their books, or indeed working in the academy. There are thousands of feminist academics who spew that kind of hatred. There's a woman named Christine Fair who tweeted out during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings that any man who supported Brett Kavanaugh should be murdered and his body parts cut up and fed to pigs.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah,
that's and that's just standard now. That's perfectly acceptable. This is a woman who teaches men, teaches young men, works with men, has power in her job over the professional careers of men and over the academic careers of the young men that she professes to. Like it's.
And let's contrast that, though. So I say these people say this insane, hateful, extremely violent, just ridiculous BS. I say make women great again or make women wives again. I get death threats for it, literally. So does my family. Like, that's how insane this is.
No, I know. It's it. I mean, any man who says anything, you remember, I'm sure you followed the case not too long ago of the teacher at Eton, which is a boys' school, a very posh boys' school in the United Kingdom.
I saw that,
merely made a very rational, fact-based video contesting the idea that there is nothing good about men, and he lost his job. He lost his job for it. And I would encourage everybody to watch the video. It's very well made. And it was hardly anti-feminist. Well, it was anti-feminist, but in the most woman-loving kind of way possible. His whole point was that there are certain things about masculinity that are very beneficial to society and indeed to women themselves, including men's desire and tendency and sense of fulfillment in their identity as providers and protectors of women. And he talked about that, in the animal world. He talked about how it manifests in human societies. Wow. And for that, he was fired, merely for saying that there are good things about men and that those good things are things that benefit women. And that's unacceptable. Imagine if he'd unleashed a tirade of the sort that Steve and I have often produced. So even the mildest dissent from the all men are pigs position of the crudest of feminist theorists is a fireable offense. And meanwhile, we have, Professor Susannah Walters at Northeastern University in Boston, I think it is, writing an op-ed in the Washington Post called baldly, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" Not an ironic title, not leading to anything complex or interesting or surprising, but simply a crudely written piece complaining that indeed men are rightly hated because men are responsible for everything that's wrong with the world. And she goes on. And, I could ream off, I've spent the last 5 years cataloging all of these instances of pure, undisguised hatred expressed by these women in positions of power who get away with it and, are praised and protected. She later on wrote an article in the Washington Post clarifying that she didn't hate all men. She rethought it in light of intersectional feminist theory.
Oh, wow.
It was really white men that she
Oh.
hated. Yeah. So, and then she
complained, like a little racism in there.
Yeah, that and a little racism. And then she complained that she'd received hate mail as a result of this, and this just proved her point. So, so this is the depth of the rot. Anyway, I mean, I often feel like I just feel incredulity looking at this stuff and talking about it. And it's not just in the world of entertainment or just in the world of academia. It is everywhere. We hear it from judges. We just on Regarding Men discussed an issue where the Australian actor Craig McLachlan, he stood trial, endured a 3-year hell on charges of sexual assault dating back to the time when he was in the Rocky Horror Show in Australia. And he was charged with what I thought were the most trivial, like unbelievably trivial forms of sexual assault, including a full body hug, a short kiss on the lips, and tickling a woman on her inner thigh. So he stood trial and faced prison time for those charges. He had, I think, 14 counts of sexual assault and common assault made against him by 4 women, all of them actresses that he had worked with. He was ultimately, after this 3-year hell, found not guilty. Okay, so that there you might say, oh, good. Well, see, meanwhile, his life is ruined. He will probably never work again as an actor. He will be known as the sexual predator, that did all these terrible things. The fact that he was acquitted will not be widely known. And the judge actually, her statement saying that she could not convict him is textbook feminism. She praises the honesty and courage of the women that came forward to destroy his life. She found them absolutely compelling, very honest. And she doesn't quite say it this way, but she essentially regretted that she couldn't put him in prison for having the temerity to give a woman a full body hug. And this is during, all of the hijinks and the roughhousing that goes on when you're part of an acting troupe. And he described, all the craziness that goes on. Women would goose him. They would make sexual comments. He'd have a woman in her underwear sitting in his lap. All of this kind of stuff was going on. He did a few things in response, what were widely accepted and, even encouraged and expected. And yet 6 years later had to stand trial for it. And the judge was furious that the law didn't allow her to find him guilty. So the hatred of men, the total dehumanization of them, and the possibility that their lives can be completely destroyed on the word of any woman, it is everywhere in our society. And yet we go on as if it's not really that serious. It's
sick.
Crazy.
It's sick. I'm part of half of the population in America that's treated like garbage by the law and by a super dominant, extremely toxic ideology called feminism.
Yeah.
And I have little nephews that I worry about. They're very young, and little brother and stuff, and it just sucks to see it. Never mind all the men that have come before me.
Yeah, I know. When I think about it, sometimes I'm just overwhelmed by the horror of it, and
it's almost like you
allow it to go on.
It's almost like you love men and respect them, Janice. How dare you?
Yeah. And that's all it is. Like, it's such a small thing. Yeah, sure. I love men. I've been treated well by men all my life. My husband doesn't like it when I say that because he thinks it sounds sort of louche in a way. But I love them in a completely wholesome way.
I was going to say you're a proud sandwich maker and wife, right?
I especially love my husband. And I don't know, everybody acts like it's so complicated, and women are just, women haven't been in the workplace for very long, and we're just working it out and all of this. It isn't complicated. It's I just never found that there was any problem. I found that men were overwhelmingly willing to work with me and other women if we were competent. I do not find in men any resentment against women, any misogyny, any sense of insecurity, anything like that. And I think that it is ridiculous that women can't, in general, give to men what they're owed, which is respect for building the incredibly productive, secure, flourishing societies, incredibly technologically and medically advanced societies that we are privileged to occupy. It's amazing that we can't thank men for that.
A woman, sister, a woman.
Yeah, I know I'm speaking to the converted, but yeah, it's like psychologists have done studies of this, that we do live in human communities where both men and women tend to have more positive associations with women. So the whole thing about protecting women, caring about women, feeling more empathy for women. If a woman cries, everybody responds. Women respond and men respond. I think there's even something like hormonal that happens in men if they see a woman crying. Somebody's done a study of this. And,
sure.
So women do have that power. But in all traditional societies, up until, 100, 150 years ago, women were expected to respect men. And there were strictures in place always to protect women, but also to punish women who got out of line. And feminists have railed against this, of course, but it was really important in all traditional societies. They were gynocentric, of course, but they distinguished very clearly between good women, women who were supporting men and supporting their society, and bad women, women who abused their children, or, who in whatever ways, weakened the society. And now it's like we can't do that anymore. All women must be good. We deny the capacity of women to commit evil. We deny the possibility that women can be motivated by, any kind of malevolence or viciousness or greed or envy or whatever it happens to be. We can't face the possibility. And so feminists always claim that feminism is the radical idea that women are human. But in fact, feminism is the opposite. It denies that women are human. It denies that women have agency to commit evil acts. And that has infected the entire society so much that even when a woman does a horrific thing like murdering her husband or murdering her children, we make excuses for her. We say it must have been because she was a victim. It must have been because she had a mental illness. It must have been because she was in some way forced into a corner and didn't feel she had any options. So our first impulse is always to excuse her. And, I don't see that ending well. It's not good for women. It's not good for society.
It's going to get us all killed.
Yeah.
Now, if I can comment, from a distance, you seem to have a very positive, loving, healthy relationship with your husband. Given that context, do you find it personally saddening, this anti-male, anti-fatherhood hatred that women are taught today, which I would think very much diminishes the potential for them to ever be in a relationship like that? Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, this hurts women as a whole too, because for a young woman who, there are still some nice young women out there who want to work in partnership with men to make our society better and want to have a family. Their chances are harmed by that in all sorts of ways. And, a lot of men are withdrawing. A lot of men won't even help a woman if they see her in trouble because they're rightfully afraid that they're going to be charged with some form of assault. There's so many different ways in which the feminist climate that we live in is damaging to women too. And so, it's very sad, very scary.
Yep. I think your cat misses you. I hear him.
I can hear that.
So you mentioned, we're not allowed to criticize women today, and women being human, these things. Obviously, I think "Make Women Great Again" that's my intention with it, is a giant refutation and an intention to make women great again in and of itself, and also to combat and abolish feminism completely. That's my real goal with it over the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And but
a great goal.
Thanks. But I think one of the most aggravating things it did to the feminists, and last year all these Vichy males, I call them the male feminists. I call them Vichy males.
Vichy
Vichy
males.
French.
Yeah.
Yeah. It basically was a giant FU to the idea that you can't criticize women. Like, yes, we can. Yes, we can, and yes, we will, and we will get it done because it needs to be done. And I do believe women are human beings; they're individuals, and they're completely open to criticism as anyone else. And I guess I was the first man in recent history to stand up and say it proudly.
Yeah.
We're gonna make you right again.
Well, they couldn't stand it. I mean, obviously the Trump echo drove them mad to begin with, but they couldn't stand the idea that there was anything about women that needed to be improved. Even though it's a pretty benign slogan, make women great again, at least it suggests that women were once great and could be again.
Yeah, I'm looking at one right now.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's pretty positive, and certainly, there have been an awful lot of campaigns run by feminists supposedly to improve men, and almost nobody objects to them, and they're not nearly as benign. I mean, they never say that men were ever great. They don't even admit that, right? They don't say make men great again. They say, let's try to make men a little bit less toxic.
Well, their position is that men have always been evil and toxic and negative, right? So why would you can't make men great again because they were never great.
They were never great, so that's okay. But to say that women have the capacity to be great and have been great in the past and can be again, that's somehow really misogynistic. So it's just crazy. And and it only stands to reason if you create a culture in which some group of people is immune to criticism, and some group of people is allowed to get away with the worst of behavior and is actually rewarded for that, it just stands to reason that you're going to create more of the bad behavior, and you're going to diminish women's capacity for moral agency. And that is utterly disastrous. Anybody that you don't hold to a high moral standard is going to diminish. They're going to deteriorate as
they're going to fall to whatever standard is set, which is zero at this point, or negative.
It's zero, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're living in a society now that encourages women to claim to be victims and to express their hatred for men as some kind of righteous position. And I actually think women who don't do that are probably made to feel that somehow they're letting the side down. And they may well feel that many job positions are closed to them, that all sorts of, community, celebration and empathy is denied to them because they refuse that particular subject position that feminism offers them. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy world we live in. I mean, it just keeps getting wilder and wilder lately, but we'll see where it goes. Yeah. I'm confident in my ability and the people like you to make the world a better place and fight like hell for it.
Well, I'm not very confident to tell you the truth.
It's a man thing. Don't worry about it.
I think it is, and I am confident in you, and that whole department of the men who feel that they are up to the task of fighting this cultural fight and turning things around. I'm really thankful that you exist. I'm fairly, my attitude, I think, could be described as Stoic Pessimism. I'm trying to endure what we have created of our world, and I'm trying to have a little bit. There's a ridiculous cat fight going on back there. Sorry.
I love cats.
I try to have some hope, and I'm happy in my personal life, but both my husband and I often feel quite dispirited when we look at things. It seems as if we doubt we'll see a turnaround in our lifetimes, but I would be delighted to be proved wrong. But the total feminization and the marginalizing of men and just the marginalizing of masculine ways of being is so striking. And I told you before we talked today that I kind of wanted to say something about COVID and the way it's been handled. And it does strike me again, now I've got off, my area of real knowledge, but that's fine. It does strike me that the response to COVID speaks volumes about the mass feminization of our society in so many different ways. Like, it's been so striking. It's different, I know, in Florida. And it's interesting that, that the border is closed, so Canadians can't even go down and see how different things are in various states, especially in Florida. In fact, we were arguing with our doctor the other day about COVID and all the various restrictive measures and the lockdowns and the mask mandates, and now the incredible pressure for everyone to be vaccinated, even children, who aren't at risk from COVID at all. We were talking to him, and he I don't think he even knew that Florida has been open. My husband said to him, Florida's been open for months and months and months, and it's doing fine. And we're still in lockdown.
We opened Disney World in Orlando, I think in late June in 2020. That's how long Florida's Disney World, thousands of people, theme parks and stuff. I never even stopped going to the gym. We guys were going to the beach. In Florida's a wild place. It's in the blood. It's in the sun and the blood and the sand. We just don't, there's a real savagery here. I was born and raised here too, so I love it. And we just have very low tolerance for this crap. So I'm sorry that you're up there dealing with that, but in Florida, it's great.
It's incredible. I mean, the doctors actually said to us, that's because they're all vaccinated. And he wouldn't listen. My husband said, no, this was way before the vaccine. This was back. I mean, I didn't realize it was as early as June. I know that the restaurants and everything, I remember DeSantis opening all the restaurants and everything in September. So, my husband was trying to tell him, no, they just took a different approach to the whole virus, and they did well in it. I mean, here we've still, we're under all these orders. We're actually being told at what stage we might be able to hug people.
That's sick.
If you can imagine, we're told we might be able to hug our friends and family at some point in July, but only if we're very good, only if we follow every rule and keep our little masks on. I mean, I see people now, the degree of compliance, the degree of longing for safety and to follow every single rule is so incredible. I see people jogging outside wearing masks. I see people driving alone in their cars wearing their masks. I see young couples with children, age 6, age 4, riding on their little tricycles, and they're all wearing masks while walking outside. It is just so incredible, the level of irrational fear that has gripped the entire society, and the longing to be given more and more rules so that we can be safe. Everywhere you go, there are arrows telling you, you can walk down this aisle, don't walk down this aisle. You have to stand here, don't stand there, do this. It's just incredible.
I flagrantly violating these things when I see them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
me too.
Yeah,
I know. It's just, and that I just, my area of study originally was 19th century Canadian literature. And just as one example, I read the journals of an author named L.M. Montgomery, who's the author of Anne of Green Gables and many other books for girls and young women. And she kept a journal pretty much her whole life. And as she became a more and more famous author, she expected the journal would eventually be published. So she turned it into a kind of public record. And she lived through the Spanish flu of 1919. And it killed many more people than COVID killed.
Of course.
And it threatened the young and the healthy. It killed many people in the prime of their life. It killed many children. And yet it was a terrible thing, and she admits that, but there was not that level of public hysteria and the angry demand that the government better do something to keep me safe. There was just the recognition that, yes, there are these things, viruses do develop, people do die. People die before their time, and that's a terrible thing. She knew many people in her own family and in her close circle of acquaintances who died. She herself was very sick with the flu. And there was none of that, that sense that the neighbor was not exercising proper moral vigilance about this public threat that we have now. It's so strange now. It's as if a kind of mass hysteria has seized the entire country where I live. And there's no difference in any of the provinces. We have provinces rather than states. Yeah. Everyone, whether it's a conservative leader or a more left-leaning leader, everybody has the lockdowns, the stay-at-home orders, the closure of businesses, the total destruction of the economy, supposedly in the name of safety. Everything. Schools have been closed in some provinces. Children have to wear masks.
Do you believe this is a push, these government edicts, to one world communism, something like that, like Steve talks about?
I'm not really sure, but certainly I will say for sure that if this was an experiment to see the level to which Canadians would be willing to go to comply with totally draconian and irrational orders, it's revealed some pretty startling things about the willingness of Canadians to do anything, to have their entire lives put on hold, potentially for years. I mean, they're talking about 2024 still having COVID measures in place.
They're never going to get, they want them forever. I think it's all a lie.
A lot of people, that's the thing. It's fine to say, okay, this is what the, people in power are doing. I don't even know, but I'd be willing to believe anything. I don't trust any of these people, but it's the willingness, even the demand of ordinary Canadians to bring it on. And in fact, the most criticism you ever hear from Canadians is when they talk about opening something up. There's a huge chorus of people saying, "You're a murderer. People are going to die." It's startling. And there's been very little resistance starting now. Finally, 14, 15 months in, there are some marches and protests, but we are still under lockdown. And they're basically kind of promising that if we're really good and we follow all the rules and we all get vaccinated, we might have some opening by September. But of course, by then the flu season will come back and then we'll all be locked down again. So unfortunately, it looks like my husband and I may not be able to travel for a very long time because they're talking about vaccine passports. They're talking about not allowing anybody to leave the country or come back in if you can't show that you've been vaccinated, so-called vaccinated. It isn't a vaccine, of course. It's a gene therapy. And, my husband and I do not want to do it. And so we're facing the prospect of being stuck here for, I don't know how many years. Hope not, because we'd love to come to Florida and be with you and everybody and, participate in your wonderful conference. But
thank you. Which is the plan, obviously. But I wouldn't get that vaccine crap if with a gun to my head. There's under no circumstances will I ever take that vaccine as long as I live, ever.
It bothers me so much, throughout the whole thing, I have hated how we are treated like children. We've been lied to. Our public health authority here in British Columbia, my province, initially said that masks didn't do anything. She did not advise them. The weave was far too large. The virion particle is far too small. It can get through any mask. She said that for weeks. Suddenly, she changed her tune almost within a day. And she even denied that she'd ever said anything else. And she got away with it. She suddenly then started advocating masks. Then she advocated wearing 2 masks. And, then she had, then she made masks mandatory in all public places. Meanwhile, the number of so-called cases, which again, you can't really necessarily trust, but if you do trust the announcement of cases, it kept going up. The more there were mask mandates, the more there were social distancing rules, the more there were closures and stay-at-home orders, the number of cases kept increasing. So the things that they were doing, self-evidently didn't work, but they kept doing them and they're still doing them. And I just despise being treated like a child that should simply unthinkingly comply. And if I raise any questions, I must be a danger to society and a terrible person. Unless, of course, I'm marching for Black Lives Matter, in which case I am applauded by the public health authority and 10,000 health officials sign a public declaration saying that systemic racism is a more serious threat to health than COVID. So it's perfectly okay to gather outside in mass numbers of thousands and to protest systemic racism. But if you gather outside in a small crowd to protest COVID measures, you are a menace to public health. The police have been given orders to deal with protesters in the most brutal manner possible. Most churches have been closed in Canada since day one, since March the 15th or something.
Wow.
The few brave Christian pastors who have kept their churches open have been incredibly harassed by police. There's one man who's been in jail for over a month because he kept his church open. I have seen children out playing ice hockey wrestled to the floor by police. I've seen a woman carrying a sign that said communism is the real virus being handcuffed and hauled away in a paddy wagon. I've seen people tackled by police thugs and harmed because they weren't wearing a mask. It's just incredible what has gone on in this country. And the main cry of Canadians has been to bring it on more and keep us safe. So it's really amazing. And yeah, just to come back to the vaccines, how they can tell us that they know these are safe. They can't possibly. They have not been tested long-term. Nobody knows what the long-term consequences of these things might be. And yet we're being pressured to take them. Even children under 12 are supposed to take them. And they're bringing in all sorts of policies whereby children can choose without their parents' consent to be vaccinated, and they're being pressured to do so by their teachers and by community leaders. It's just mind-boggling.
It is. The insanity is mind-boggling. That's the best way to put it. In totality, with COVID and all this crap and the vaccines, every inch of it has been insane. Yeah. In Florida, it's been the best in America by far, I think. But even that, I'm like, I wish he was even more savage. And DeSantis is incredible as our governor, the leader of our state, the executive leader.
He's a good guy. Yeah.
But it's been even. I just hate every second, every little thing that happened with COVID was stupid and insane and irrational and ultimately evil. I think it became very quickly that. Yeah. But I love your takes on this, and I can tell you in America, our tolerance for this stuff is lower, and that's why you do see states like Texas and Florida and other states not pushing even more aggressively back against this, as Florida kind of leads the way with that.
Yeah.
So we're not perfect in America, but we have a history of, as you know, shooting tyrants and just basically killing them. And there's literally, it's in our blood, I think, as Americans, to fight tyranny and be very bold and very aggressive against it. Yeah. So I do think that's going to end in America, this COVID crap. And I think hopefully it will bleed off to Canada and other nations as well over time. We'll see.
Over time, I am hopeful that, in a year or two, surely it will die out. And I thank God for the red states that really do care about individual liberties and fight for freedom, because we don't have that spirit in Canada. We never really had it. We have a different history, a different cultural attitude. A great deal of it based on a kind of smug sense of moral superiority to the United States, even while we, of course, depend entirely on the United States for our robust economy when we had one, and of course for military protection. We've been able to spend lots of money on things that we think make us morally superior, such as state-run healthcare, which I can tell everybody it has a lot of problems. Because we didn't have to spend money on a military, because we were depending on the very country that our best friends that we at the same time always like to criticize. And
even with all that, I know what you mean, that moral superiority thing. You see that from Canadian liberals, but even growing up in Florida and in America, there was always an affinity toward Canadians. They were very, as a child, even I had a couple neighbors who were Canadian, and they would visit like snowbirds. Like 6 months they live in Canada and 6 months in Florida.
Yeah.
And they had an accent and stuff. It was very curious to me as a child, and I liked them. And my friends too, we would talk to them, our neighbors and stuff. So there's always been a positivity that I've seen in America for Canadians, like the maple syrup and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we like you guys, even if some of them look down on us.
Yeah. Well, that's what I've always said. Every time a Canadian travels in the United States, usually the response from Americans is wholehearted welcome, hearty, open-handed, generous welcome. Canadians, I think, envy the United States and feel inferior, and therefore
good point.
have to criticize. But anyway, I certainly do hope that who knows, maybe there will be a better future than I'm predicting right now, because my husband and I would love to come to Florida. I mean, our long-term goal is actually potentially to move to Florida.
Oh yeah, bring it on. Yeah, let's do it.
So we'd love to check out possible places where we might live, but certainly in the short term, we'd also love to be at the conference and everything that's happening.
I was born and raised here and I love it, but I've also traveled the world and I still love it. To me, Florida is the best place in the world, and I've seen 26 countries now at 32 years old. And there's some others that compete. Like I love Poland too. Poland is so amazing. But Florida it's my birthplace and my home, and it's so savage, and there's such good politics here and individual freedom. Even, the beaches, the physical geography of it's amazing. It's not perfect. Yeah. It's super hot in the summer. But,
you're telling that to a Canadian in a rainy, cold province. It sounds like a real hassle being too hot. I got to go swimming today. I'm too hot.
We can go. Generally, you can go swimming on Christmas. That's how warm it is here.
It's incredible.
So, now
it's just like a dream to me.
Yeah. Hey, living the dream right here. Here you go. Boom. So last question I want to get to here. We've been a little bit over an hour, so we'll start kind of winding down. So, the intention is for you to speak at 22 convention if it's in any way feasible with respect to your values. 100% get it. What do you want to speak to about young women? Have you begun thinking about your speech? To me, you're one of the biggest speakers there. I love, like I told you at the opening, I really love your kind of not only your personality, but who you are. Like, I really believe that you're sincere and savage, and you want to defend men and advocate for the truth and for freedom and against feminism. So in my mind, you're just one of my favorites at the event. You have some competitors. But
there's some really great women out there. Yeah.
But what do you want to say to young women? It's a lot of women there, but for me, I think about the videos that we get to publish, obviously, like TED Talks. Yeah. So what do you want to say to women at this conference? What have you begun thinking about that?
Well, I haven't, thought how I would do it, but the basic message would be avoid victimhood like the plague, because once it grips you, it changes your whole way of being, and there's nothing good about it. So that would be the main thing. But how exactly I would do that, maybe showing, where it takes root in some feminist advocates and then how it's resulted in really damaging policies that are destructive to both men and women, something like that. But it's just, like, get away from the victimhood mentality, because it cripples everything healthy and productive, both in the individual, in their development, and in the possibility of any kind of harmonious, social interaction between men and women.
Yeah. I love it. I'm excited, and I hope you and your husband get to make it down. It's going to be a great time. October 21 to 24. And you guys they're not on sale yet, the tickets, actually. This is just kind of a preview. But they will be on sale soon, about 2 weeks from now. They're going to go on sale for all 3 events. Someone in the chat actually asked if this is for women or for men, and it's only for women. You have to have 2 X chromosomes to buy a ticket. You cannot have a Y chromosome. Mostly it's men speaking for mansplaining, but we also have some womansplaining, obviously, here. Femsplaining, I call it. And I'm proud of that. We snuck one in last year, an anti-feminist chick at the last minute. Jennifer Molesky, she's cool. You like her. But we have several now. I invited Dr. Helen Smith, for example, and there's several other.
She's fantastic.
Yeah,
Love her.
I know. I got to get her. I got to confirm her still, but I'm really excited. Yeah.
She's wonderful. I hope she'll agree. I love her book, Men on Strike. It's such a sane, empathetic. She got it, and it's a fantastic book.
I'm swinging for the fences. I'm going to go next for Camila Pagula.
I think it's Palia. Yeah, she's fun. She is she's one of those people. I don't even care whether I agree with her. I don't always agree with her. She's a Bernie Sanders supporter. I can't get that through my head. I don't understand. But I don't care. I love her. Whatever she has to say, she is such an exhilarating, incredibly smart speaker. And, you talk about savage. Wow. Like, she's the definition of savage.
Yeah. Coming from you, that means a lot, but I know what you mean. I've seen her talk, and she is brutal. Incredible. So she's savage and brutal at the same time, a little bit different, I'd say.
Great.
I'm going to think about Christina Hoff Sommers. I don't know. Did she block me on Twitter? I don't think she blocked me on Twitter, but she was fighting with me on Twitter once, because I was going after her for being just too soft on feminism, and she didn't like that. But We'll
Well,
see. We'll see.
The books that she's written, The War on Boys is a tremendous book.
Yeah.
You know, I forgive her nearly anything for that. I do often feel that she wants to have her cake and eat it too.
Yep.
You know, she criticizes extreme feminism, but she still wants, well, I don't want to get into saying anything bad about her, because as I say, I'd forgive her anything. Her, the other book, Who Killed Feminism,
Yeah.
you know, she just exposes all the false research, all the false claims. It's an incredibly useful book for our side, for sanity.
I think with a woman like, or any public figure, but particularly here focusing on Christina, I think it's complicated. It's nuanced, her views, and I don't hate her at all. I think she has done good work, and good exposes of feminism in her video series too. Like I mentioned earlier, Factual Feminist.
Fantastic, just fantastic. Yeah, I'd love it if you could have her speak, because. Well, we're open. We're not like the other side. You know, we're interested in having disagreements with people.
Yes.
You know,
I view my conventions as free speech platforms, and I don't want everyone there to be in lockstep with what I personally think. That's not the purpose. I view it like a painting, and so I kind of create the canvas for you guys, and then I fill it in with speakers who get to paint it themselves. And there needs to be some disagreements. If everybody agrees on every little thing, that's weird, and that's an echo chamber. That's stupid. So. That's feminism in a nutshell, is what an echo chamber of insanity and negativity.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So, well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you once again. I would like to interview you again, probably in a few weeks or a few months before the event. I do, of course, hope you get to make it down. If you want to move here, go for it. Yeah. So, bring your cats. We got plenty of cats. Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Anthony. It was great speaking to you as always.
You too. Where can people? I put a link to your new Gab, because you closed your Twitter, right?
I closed Twitter. If they canceled Trump, I'm not going to be on it. So I kind of had moments of regret. I'm not on there anymore. So I'm on Gab.
I miss you on Twitter. Yeah.
No followers on Gab, and I haven't done much on Gab, I have to admit. But so basically I'm just, you can find me at Studio Brûlé. You can find me with the Fiamengo files. I'm not making as many videos now, but I still am making them. And you can find me on Regarding Men as well.
That's with Paul Elam, right?
Yeah, with Paul and Tom. Yeah, we do weekly chats about things.
What's the website? Regardingmen.com?
I'm not sure, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I think it's that.
Everybody's Google or DuckDuckGo Regarding Men. You'll find it.
Yeah.
And there are links to your Gab, and I think something else. Oh, your book I put in the Amazon links too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's a good book.
Oh, I have. Yeah, here we go. Boom. Everybody go get them. Amazon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Janice, thanks so much. We'll wind down. Everybody else, thanks for watching, everybody, today. I'll see you probably next week on the Red Man group, probably about 11 a.m. Saturday. Peace out. Hit the like button, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. It'll help Red Man Group, 21 Studios, and of course, Janice, the speaker here as well. Thanks, Janice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.